Man's domain over the world is absolute. So much so that we often create things to challenge this. We conjure up exceptions to this rule, ideas and imaginative things in isolated areas where there's no evidence to disprove or prove it. Is it fake? Probably. But the notion that some say it's real makes you question yourself and your world. Sometimes, these things don't stay in our imaginations. A call came into the Jonestown Sheriff's Department. A woman claiming her youngest of 3 children had gone missing. Their boy, Preston. The usual questions were asked. Gone for how long? Last known location, age, etc. The dispatch officer sent out a notice to all patrol cars, then sent a detective out to the caller. Detective Elliot Miles pulled up to the suburban house. He knocked on the door and was let in. The mom was erratic, the dad angry at himself and frustrated. The detective spoke to them. I started out in Texas. Well, I was born in Ohio. I moved to Texas after I was too old to change accents. Down there, people go missing quite often. Some of it's cartel trafficking, but a lot of times people went for a midnight stroll in the desert and went farther than they thought. However, 99% of the cases I dealt with, I solved. The only people I couldn't get back were the ones who didn't want to be found. Miles paused for a moment, letting this info sink in. There isn't a lot of trafficking in Colorado, at least not in this area. If people go missing in flyover country, it's usually them getting lost in the woods or a relative or significant other who did the dirty work. Mr. and Mrs. Casey, I believe this will be a lost in the woods problem, given the extensive forest near town. His confidence helped the couple relax a bit. They've never gone out that far, not into those woods, not alone anyways. They know about the mountain lions and bears, Mrs. Casey said. Is it possible a friend or a group coerced Preston into going out there? Any questionable people he or the 3 of them hang around? Elliot replied. Mr. Casey chimed in. They're friends with the kids around here. We all know each other. None of the kids go out there either. Miles nodded as Mr. Casey spoke. Do you mind if I take a look in his room? Mrs. Casey nodded and led him to the back of the house. It was a typical 7-year-old boy's room. Posters of cartoon shows, action figures, and toy cars scattered about the floor. However, there was a small notebook on the nightstand. Elliot picked it up. That's his coloring book, the middle sister spoke up suddenly, having come from her room. Don't worry, I can't share the details about ongoing investigations. This is part of that. Miles spoke with a slight humor in his voice, which was lost in the grim atmosphere. The first few pages were nothing of interest to the case. A few drawings of the characters on popular TV shows and his toys. He skipped to the last few pages, which appeared to be that of just line work, drawings of family, friends, trees and such. Miles put the notepad back in its place. As he exited the bedroom, he glanced into the oldest sister's room. It was much less eccentric, given that she was 12. The girl was motionless on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She hasn't done much since Preston went missing. It's only been a few hours. You'd think she'd be more worried. Mrs. Casey spoke in a hushed tone. The detective rubbed his face a bit before speaking again. First, we'll be checking the usual places, their school, the hangout spots for the teens, all of it. Then we'll sweep the woods. You're more than welcome to join in on the efforts. Miles handed the couple his card, telling them to call him with any details they might remember later. They nodded, Mrs. Casey handed Elliot a sheet of paper. It had a printed photo of the 3 kids in it. Back at the station, Miles circled Preston in red, then printed off multiple copies of the picture, handing it out to all the patrol units and instructing them to post them all over town. Detective Elliot Miles, Personal Log 1. I've always hated starting new cases. There's no info, no prior leads, no shortcuts. What's worse is that I'm not exactly well established in this area, not like I was in Texas. Given that there were known hotspots for kidnappings, it wasn't hard to find people. But out here, where the woods are thick and the trust between neighbors is even more, sometimes people don't have the healthy skepticism of their community as much as they should. Sometimes that old lady down the street is actually running a meth lab. Here's to hoping this doesn't turn into a 411 statistic. The detective's friend, Joey, came up to his desk and sat on the corner. So Ellie, what'd you tell him? Lost cause? Never gonna see their kid again? You're a real fucking dick, you know that? Miles responded. Not like you ain't gonna find him. Small town, sorta. Kinda hard to go missing in this place for long. Joey bumped Miles on the shoulder. The detective fired back. Yeah? I've seen the reports. 5 kids 20 years ago. Never got them back. Well, that was before your time, right? You're supposed to be some hotshot fucking border detective. We were but men looking at shadows before you came and showed us the light, right? Joey's wit was on point, as usual. Miles gave him a sarcastically amused face. Since when were you a philosophy dickhead? Oh, come on, Ellie. Half the calls around here just end up with us throwing drunk bastards in the tank for the night. I gotta find something more interesting than filing reports. No wonder why we're never ahead on the paperwork. Miles shot back. Right then, the power went out in the building. Doesn't help that last storm fucked up our power. Good time to check those hotspots. Right. There was a hint of annoyance in Miles's voice, as if this case wasn't actually interesting to him. His public face was different than his private face. Miles sat in the passenger side of the unmarked car, while Joey dealt with the traffic. So what do you think it is with the kid? Bad home life? Ran away? Maybe got caught up in the wrong group? Joey questioned him while cruising down a side road. Fuck if I know, man. 7 years old, not really the age to get caught up in the wrong crowd, Miles said. House was nice. Parents looked like they only take a sip of red wine once every 10 years. Pictures of the family on vacation. No one's getting beat in that house. Maybe a light spanking for really serious offenses, if even that. Other kids look like they're in decent shape, Joey replied. From what I saw with the other 2, no malnutrition. Skin is normal color. Hell, maybe even a bit of a tan on them. Elliot paused, remembering more details. They were told not to go into the woods, so I assume they're the outdoorsy type of kids. The missing one's drawing pad only had shit from cartoons and his friends and family. The model fucking American household, Joey remarked. Their sweep of the local playgrounds and schoolyards turned up nothing. The more dingy spots, unlikely for a 7-year-old, also came up clean, at least for any signs of the boy. Same couldn't be said for meth and heroin. The 2 returned to the car. Miles radioed in to begin the search of the woods. He then called the parents to join in on the search. Joey let slip a grim reminder. We're probably gonna have to prepare for the mess we're gonna find him in out there, if there's anything left. Miles held his head for a moment before responding. On the border, near Mexico, Me and the patrol got tipped off on some smugglers. He had a dry tone, as if the story no longer bothered him. Trying to cross through the Big Bend Park. Lot of unforgiving terrain out there. We figured they had already crossed the Rio Grande. There's a mine a few miles north of the river, depending on where you cross from. The Morisco Mine. Used to get ore out of there back in the early 1900s or some shit. Whenever we got a lead out in that park, we always checked the mine. Usually, we found nothing. Elliot paused for a moment, stone-faced. Let me guess, this time was different. Joey interjected. Yeah. Miles continued. As soon as we pulled up to the area, we knew something went down, badly. There was a shredded body near one of the ruined buildings. It didn't take long to find the group. Granted, they weren't in one piece. He took another pause, assembling the memories. They were ripped apart, body parts all over the place. Ground was soaked in blood, made it muddy. We had seen smugglers execute their luggage before, when it was slowing them down too much. But they never went that far. Bodies of the cartel were present too. Miles stopped for a second, tapping the dashboard. We thought it might have been wildlife, maybe a pack of coyotes, but the bodies didn't show signs of being eaten. Joey looked over at Miles as he finished his thought. Someone, or something, killed those people. Not because it was hungry or involved, but because it felt like it. We found bullet casings too. You mean they tried to fight back, like a rival gang or something? Joey attempted to provide an explanation. We thought so too, at first. No bullet holes in the bodies, Miles explained. Joey raised his hands in mild confusion. Then what the fuck was it? One of the patrol officers said something that comes back to me every so often, Miles said with a fading tone. A lot of things in the desert we don't know about. Write it off as cartel violence and try to move on. The woods out here aren't much different. At least that's what some of the old-timers talk about, Joey said while he put the car in gear and headed for the forest. A few ghost stories pop up here and there. When I was still in school, we had our own version of the Jersey Devil out here. Supposedly some teens were smoking, drinking, and getting to third base when they were all slaughtered by some creature. This was about 20 years before I heard it then. Joey smiled to himself. After I joined the force, I quietly looked into it. It was nothing. I mean, we all knew it was probably bullshit, but sometimes it nags at you until you know. Maybe we got our own dogmen out here. Hell, $20 says it's Bigfoot. Miles shot back with a smirk. Joey tried to hide a smile. Kid's still missing and you're already putting bets on Bigfoot. And you call me the dickhead. Within 15 minutes, there were dozens of people. Some police, mostly other civilians. Miles gathered their attention and began to speak. All right, we're looking for a 7-year-old boy, Preston Casey. If you haven't seen his picture yet, there are printouts on the table behind you. Grab one and keep it on you, Elliot began. Now, Preston answers to 2 different nicknames, Prez and Presley. He has been missing for upwards to 16 hours. We believe he went missing last night, so he still might be in his sleepwear, a light blue 2-piece pajama set. He may also be in casual wear. Now, be warned, there are bears and mountain lions in the area. If you have a gun on you, have it at the ready. However, do not attempt to engage with the predators. If you see one, head back here and inform us where you stopped searching, and we'll cover it." Joey chimed in. "The noise we'll be making should drive the nasty stuff away, but keep your head on a swivel. We'll be doing teams of 3, 1 officer, 2 civilians. This way we can keep in radio contact. If everyone is set, find your teams and head out." The search effort began a few minutes after the briefing. Joey and Miles took their teams in opposite directions. Miles was used to the woods. Growing up in Ohio, it was like second nature to him. But these forests had a way of being a bit suffocating. The branches liked to reach out and grab hold. They called out for Preston hundreds of times, the occasional twig being snapped by a deer, and birds flying over would shoot their gazes in that direction, but to no avail. Nearly an hour and a half had passed with no sign of the boy. Within Elliot's group, the other 2 men began talking about theories, bringing up national park disappearances. Elliot held his tongue, while silently cringing at their faux attempts at being on-the-spot detectives. The sun had just passed its peak. Miles was about to tell the other 2 to head back, until one of the men tripped over a log and took a hard fall. Miles ran up to the man to see if he was injured. As the man slowly sat up from the fall, seemingly unharmed, he quickly jumped back from the log. Miles frowned at him, then looked to where the man was staring at, wide-eyed. He pulled out his radio. "Hey Joey, we got a problem."
"Bad news on the kid?"
"Don't know yet. Just found a severed hand, adult-aged."
"Jesus."
"Gonna express it to the hospital, see if they can't do DNA on it."
"Shit's gonna take a while. You and I both know about the 48-hour limit on these cases."
"Keep the search going. Don't tell the parents. Isn't directly tied to the case. Don't need them getting in the way." Elliot looked at the other 2 people with him. They both nodded.
"Right. Shit, man."
Miles led them back to the staging area before speeding off to the hospital. He turned in the hand. However, the technicians gave him the bad news. It would be at least 24 hours before they could get any results. With that, the detective returned to the precinct. Detective Elliot Miles, personal log 2. "It's been 3 hours since I got the hand turned in for testing. I keep pushing for us to get our own lab for this kind of shit, but we rarely deal with this stuff. Chief says it isn't a priority. My mind is racing with all the possibilities. However, I keep finding myself at an impasse with 2 major ones. I want to think it's human trafficking or wildlife attack, but both have glaring issues. If it was trafficking violence, it would have been messier. More blood, more signs of struggling. Same goes for the wildlife. The sever point was a clean cut. If it was animal related, the skin and inner tissue would have been more shredded. This was done with a blade. A very sharp blade. And a very precise hand. We haven't had reports of single actors in the area performing things like this. So my only realistic thought is the one I really hope it won't be. The reason I left Texas. Meat marketing. However, before I tear apart the town looking for that activity, I'm gonna look in a different area. One that I have 0 patience or tolerance for. The sex offender registry. It was 6:30 p.m. when Joey returned from the search. Nothing new to report. Miles gave him a look of exhaustion. "Don't get comfortable. We're leaving again." "Got something?" "An idea, and not one I like." Miles's tone was starting to weigh on Joey. He peered over Miles' shoulder to see what his computer monitor had on it. Joey went to his desk, pulled open the lower drawer, and grabbed a piece of paper. You know, one of these days those are gonna get you arrested. Hell, I'd do it myself if I had an ounce of respect for these kind of people, Miles retorted. Elliot reported their next move to the dispatcher over the radio before taking off. As fucked as this sounds, I kinda hope he has the kid. It'll make this case a lot easier, Joey started. The radio came to life. The dispatcher spoke out.
20 units in the area. We have a domestic at 27th Upton Street. Mom just called, said her son is threatening her with a knife.
Miles and Joey looked at each other. Then Miles picked up the radio. Yeah, this is vehicle 204. We're already on our way. He then looked to Joey again. Looks like you won't be needing that fake warrant. Joey switched on the lights and sirens, then blasted down the road. As they pulled up to the small suburban house, they could hear a woman screaming from the backyard. Throwing caution out or waiting for backup, the two rushed to the back, kicking the gate open. They saw James Coleman, the man they had come to question, holding his mother hostage with a knife to her neck. The detectives' guns were in an instant trained on the man. James, you gotta put the knife down. You don't want to hurt your mom, right? Elliot attempted to calm James down. He was unresponsive to the detectives. His knife hand was shaking violently, the edge scraping against his mom's neck. What's this about, James? Why you doing this? Joey attempted to take a step forward. James tightened the hold he had on his mother. Listen, you got your back against the fence. If you drop the knife, we'll put our guns away and we can solve this. Whatever it is you got trouble in you. Miles backed up Joey. James relaxed his stance, letting his mother go free, who ran to Joey for safety. James, however, was still holding the knife. James began shaking his head. You're never gonna find that boy, he said. Before anyone could react, he swiftly ripped the knife through his neck. Miles was too caught off guard to fire a disabling round into his arm or leg. He quickly radioed for an ambulance and backup. James's mother went back to her son's body, clutching it in her arms, shrieking for all the world to hear. What the fuck is going on, man? Joey reacted, mystified by the scene in front of him. By the time the ambulance arrived, James was dead for more than 2 minutes. Too much blood loss to even consider trying to bring back. A crowd had gathered, congesting the small two-way street. The detective took the mom back in the house to question her. She was completely clueless as to why James had suddenly snapped like he did. She allowed the detectives to search his room. The first thing that caught Joey's eye was the police scanner. He heard us coming when you told dispatch where we were going. And given what he said out there, sounds like it sent him over the edge. He knew something that probably would have gotten him locked away. Miles found some notepads near James's desk and began flipping through it. Crude drawings of childlike figures. Despite what James had done to end up on the registry, these drawings weren't of a sexual nature. All the figures were in a wooded background, trees all around them. Some drawings had only one kid in the woods. Others had whole groups. Should probably check his PC, see if he had anything on there. Joey spoke up. I don't think we'll find a damn thing on it. I think you got caught up in something more. I think there are traffickers in the area, and they leveraged James to be a part of it. I would say he's just been listening in on the scanners about the kid, but he knew more. We'll take his computer in, just in case. Joey agreed with Miles' sentiment. Get the computer back to forensics, then call it a day. What about you? I'm gonna check the woods behind the house. That was the running theme in the notepad. I'll have a squad car wait for me. Joey nodded, and had some patrol officers help him unplug the PC and load it into the unmarked car. Meanwhile, Miles started off into the woods. Around half a mile in, Elliot found a large pile of sticks with rocks surrounding it. He looked around and into the pile, attempting to see anything unnatural. Lifting up the pile, he did find something. An article of clothing. A small shirt, too small to be something of Preston's. He grabbed it and took it back to the house, asking James's mother if it was some of James's clothes when he was younger. She denied this, stating that they either sold off or threw away clothes that he grew out of. The detective, along with the officer, returned to the precinct and turned the shirt into forensics to pull any DNA samples they could and have the hospital run it. Detective Elliot Miles, Personal Log 3. All that's been on my mind since yesterday is, what would make James go off the deep end like that? He knew we were coming from the police scanner, but what did he know that drove him to such extreme measures? I can only think now that we are dealing with trafficking in this area, and that maybe they found him through the registry, then exploited him to help them. What he said to us means he knows what's going on, and our next move has to be to investigate all the other offenders on that list. If the meat marketers got to one of them, they probably got to all of them. You know, I left Texas because of all the bloodshed at the border, and for a while, Colorado was looking to be a nice and boring state. So much for that. Joey came up to Miles at his desk again. I went ahead and got to one of the other offenders on the list. The guy knew James. Guess they talked to each other. He heard what happened. Give you anything good enough to move on? Miles responded. Yeah, the old lumber mill. Apparently our offender has heard about things going on there. Miles came back with a slightly annoyed tone. And he didn't say anything. Why? He didn't want the cops to think he was in on it. Joey rolled his eyes as he spoke. Right. Go get an unmarked, and wear some hiking shoes. The lumber mill was a few miles outside of town. It was host to some local legends, mostly those of grade school children. It was said to be haunted, stalked by unnatural creatures, and the site of a portal to hell. The only truth to this place was an owner and his all-too-average divorce. But that was ages ago. They could see the yard lights from the mill, illuminating the area in the overcast weather. They both knew this meant their info was right. The mill was active, even though it shouldn't be. They got low and ascended the last hill before the mill could be seen in full. As they peeked over the tall grass, they saw a scene they weren't expecting. There were a few pickups parked on the grounds, with their inhabitants slaughtered. They both looked at each other, wide-eyed. Joey radioed in for backup. Just as he finished the call, they heard yelling coming from within the mill. They ignored protocol and rushed down the hill. They couldn't wait for more units. As they approached the building, they began to realize just how gruesome it was. Despite the bodies having rifles and shotguns, it looked like they were killed with blades. Every room they went to clear, expecting some kind of resistance. It was either empty or more bodies. The main saw room was awash in violence. It held the kidnapped victims. Before the two could investigate, more yelling sounded through the hallway just beyond them. They quickly found the source. It was coming from behind a locked door. They both kicked it, nearly launching the door off of its old hinges. A man knelt on the floor, had a knife raised above his head, ready to impale another man below him. Joey threw his gun behind him, back into the hall as he leapt for the knife wielder, grabbing his arms and subduing him. Miles quickly pulled out his cuffs, helping Joey to arrest the man. The man on the floor, now without the extra weight on him, reached for a gun, originally just out of his grasp. Just as he aimed it at Miles, Joey gave a resounding kick to his head, dazing him, giving them the time to also cuff him. After the two men were neutralized, Joey leaned against the wall, his hands and arms shaking. Miles pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Miles. Send an ambulance with backup, and call Denver Forensics. We're gonna need the big guys." As backup arrived, the two detectives walked both men outside. The EMS crew deduced there were no serious injuries to either man, allowing the police to take them into questioning. Miles and Joey stayed behind to investigate the scene. Joey made the walk back to the car while Miles got started. Elliot checked every inch of the building he could for the missing kid. What few rooms that were in use had no signs of the child. He went back to the saw room. Joey returned then and helped him to try and identify the bodies. Miles couldn't help but wonder about the room the man was almost killed in. He stood at the doorway, now having a more calm state of mind to notice what it was. It was a shrine. Branches and candles were littered throughout the small room. He looked at the floor where the two men were. There was some kind of shape scratched into the floor, one that he didn't recognize. As Miles looked at it closer, he realized it had been carved in recently, possibly that day. He stood there for a moment longer, taking in the scene, committing some of it to memory. Joey came up behind. "None of the bodies match our kid, and honestly, our case doesn't really take precedent now. We're past the 48-hour window anyway." "We've got one last lead," Miles countered. "Those two we caught. They have to know something. And if they don't?" Elliot walked past Joey without a word, the both of them getting back in the car and heading down to the precinct. The interrogations lasted only a few minutes. The psycho wouldn't speak, and the other guy barely said a few words, most of which were slurs directed at the detectives. Several hours later, back in the offices, Miles sat at his desk with an obvious frustration. Detective Elliot Miles, Personal Log 4. This is the worst part of any case. When you are, or at least were, on the very edge of solving it. You only needed that one answer to make all the questions fall in line. But someone or something is standing in your way. And you wish it would just move, but it won't. And worse yet, no power on Earth seems like it'll budge this blockade. If I had it my way, I'd torture the answers out of them, reliable or not. Joey didn't have any remarks or crack any jokes. Even he was angry at the whole situation. The whole precinct was quiet, save for the officers and utility workers milling about the cubicles. Miles finally broke the silence. "It's been 3 days since the kid went missing. We hit our time limit." "They found people even after that. Weeks after they gave up the search," Joey responded, with a false optimism. Miles shook his head slightly. Given the fact that there was human trafficking under our noses, I think he's gone. So that's it. We're done. Joey had a solemn voice. Miles pulled out a report sheet, ready to fill it out and close the case. However, just as his pen hit the paper, the lights began to flicker, catching everyone's attention. Joey and Miles turned their heads to the door leading to the holding cells. There were blood-wrenching screams echoing out. Every officer in the room rushed for the door. Much like in the office, the lights were stuttering all throughout the hall. The screaming was nearly ear-shadowing, the echo causing it to amplify. They realized it was coming from the psycho's holding cell. They yelled for the door operator to release the locks, but he seemed to be disoriented and unfocused. Before the locks were finally released, they heard a sharp crack echo through the halls. A gunshot. This woke the operator and allowed him to finally let them in. The two bolted down the hall, the flickering lights making it feel like a slideshow, somewhat throwing them off. Once they reached the cell, they found the barred door open. The psycho on the floor. A gunshot to the head. And one of the utility men from the offices, facing the back wall. They drew their guns and told him to turn around. As he did, he drew his gun, forcing them to fire. The utility worker fell to the floor, dead. A few minutes later, the medics came in and took the bodies away. Miles stepped out of the cell. His eyes became fixated on the other suspect, standing wide-eyed against the door. He signaled to open the gate. The metal bars rushed open and clanged against the steel frame. Miles grabbed the man and threw him to the floor, demanding to know what happened. The man said nothing. He could say nothing. Miles left him on the floor, the man still in shock.
He doesn't fucking go anywhere. Not till we know what he does.
Elliot pointed at the suspect with an anger in his voice he seldom acquired. An hour later, while Miles was reviewing all of their evidence, what little they had, Joey came up to him. Other guy won't talk. Doc says he's catatonic. Fucking somehow. And get this, the guard operating the doors blacked out. MRI backs it up. So we know he isn't working with them. Whatever the fuck this is. What about the worker guy? How did he even get in there? Miles questioned. Joey rubbed his eyes. This is where it gets weird. The guy wasn't even a utility worker. Some office jockey a few blocks north of here. Never showed up to work today. But he was in his work clothes, like he intended to go in. Miles had a grim line of thought. How much you want to bet he's got some kind of connection to kids? Joey looked at him, puzzled. Think about it, Miles started. James was a predator. That psycho guy we caught was helping traffic people, children included. And obviously whoever kidnapped Preston has a similar MO. Sounds like you don't think the traffickers were the end point. Joey's deduction was keen. No, I don't. Search the guy's house. See what you can find, Miles said, standing up. Where are you going? I've got a few more places to see about. Nothing important enough for the both of us. I'll keep you informed if shit turns up. Joey nodded. Miles had looked into the other disappearances that had happened years prior, and he wanted to talk to one of the parents. The next day, he paid a visit to Mrs. Eleanor, an older widowed woman. Her daughter had disappeared 15 years ago. The pain had come and gone, but the memories remained. She let the detective into her house. It was quaint, something from the late 70s. Miles sat on the couch beside her recliner. He asked her about the events, the details, what the police had said. Her child, Mary, had been playing in the yard, close to the woods, like always. Her mom keeping an eye on her from the living room window. It was in the briefest moments that she vanished. At first, Mrs. Elnor didn't even recognize she was gone. She figured she had just gone out of sight, somewhere else on the property. It was 3 hours later, when dinner was ready, that she noticed her daughter's absence. She called out for her, but no answer nor sight of the girl came. The police were called that night. The search went on for 2 weeks before it was called off. Mrs. Elnor didn't quit when everyone else did. She searched for months, whenever she had any amount of free time, or when she grew restless in the middle of the night. But even her dedication waned. "Sometimes people just vanish out here," she told the detective. And after everything he had witnessed in the last 4 days, he didn't have anything to rebuttal. Miles thanked her for her time and was on his way. He returned to the police station with a somber head on his shoulders. The rest of the office was quiet. Pens writing against paper and keyboards being typed on. Everyone had their eyes firmly focused on their work. Joey came up to him. "Just our fucking luck, man," he started. "Cameras glitched out when the lights went to shit." "Of course they did," Miles said without much enthusiasm. His ability to be shocked was becoming numb. "We did search the guy's house. You were right. Had a restraining order from his ex-wife. Apparently he was abusing her and the kids, an alcoholic. Built a fucking shrine to his kids. Found a letter he wrote. Thought that if he killed his ex-wife and got his kids back, that his life would go back to normal." Miles nodded. A mind obsessed with his kids, even if there weren't devious intentions for them. He took Joey with him to the holding cell where the 2 men were killed, to try and find anything that could help figure out the case. The other man sat at the back of his cage, still distraught. He still won't talk. Well, nothing cohesive anyways. Joey looked at the man. "Going crazy, just like the other guy did," Miles speculated. The gate to the other cell opened. They threw the room apart, looking for anything out of place. It was empty, save for what was supposed to be there, bed and toilet. They noticed the other man pointing at them, then followed his finger to the spot it was fixed on. The wall. Haphazardly scratched into the concrete from the man who killed the psycho was a symbol. The sawmill, Miles recollected. In the room where the other guy was almost stabbed. A circle with an X through it. "You ever seen it before?" Joey asked. "No," Miles shook his head. "But I'm gonna find out what it is." He snapped a picture of it with his phone and headed out of the holding area. Miles elected to research it on his own. After the death of their most promising suspect, he was starting to get an idea that there were prying eyes near the precinct. That night, Miles began his search. At first he started with symbology, looking through pagan, Norse, and other religious and cultural languages. None matched the picture. Sometimes a page would seem promising, only to reveal itself as some story concocted by a mentally unstable person. Some rabbit holes were deeper than others, but none seemed to go down the path that was needed. Anything that had to do with missing children were either solved or didn't match up. He began finding himself in the deep end of the search results, finding obscure newspaper scans from a site that seemed to be stuck in the early age of the internet. Luckily, whoever ran the domain did a lot of the hard work already. Every newspaper had its contents transcribed, allowing the users to look up keywords. Most of the papers seemed to be from other small towns. The About section explained that the site owner purposely collected scans from small-town America, believing it to hold evidence of the strange, rather than finding it through the mainstream or internet blogs. Miles entered child disappearance and many mutations of that configuration. Thousands of results came up. Then he added symbol to the search. The results were vastly narrowed down to around 20. This is where the hunting would begin. At least 3 of the results were that of coincidence, the missing child being found in the woods and happening to be near old markings on trees. A few were legit cult activity, but the children were either found alive or dead, but they were always found. There was only one print, a small section buried by other stories, but it had the one thing it needed to catch his eye. The symbol. The paper was from 2004. It was blurry and hard to see, but it had just enough fidelity to make out that same shape. A circle with an X through it. Unfortunately, there wasn't much to the report. Parents realized their kid went missing. No idea where they went. Everyone is distraught. A day or two later, that symbol shows up scrawled on the kid's bedroom wall. Miles searched for the publisher, found the phone number, but upon calling it, it was no longer in use. However, the article he was reading had a quote from the mother. "Before our girl went missing, I saw a strange person around the area. They looked like they were wearing a suit, like what people from the government wear." It was anecdotal, but the symbol lining up with his, he had to take it. He then began researching known FBI and CIA codes. However, it was either an obscure code, or it didn't belong to them. But at this point, Miles was willing to take any lead he could get. It had been 3.5 hours of searching, leaving him mentally exhausted. The next day, Miles was at his desk when Joey finally showed up. "So, you find anything useful?" he asked. Miles sighed. "Less than credible, but more than nothing. Found one instance of that symbol in another case like this." He started. "The girl goes missing. A few days later, that symbol shows up on her bedroom wall." "When was this?" Joey interjected. 2004. Not exactly recent, but it was literally the only thing I could find. What's more, the mom was quoted saying that she saw a strange suited man around the neighborhood before the girl went missing. Joey was confused. Suited? Like Men in Black, CIA, FBI kind of stuff, Miles said coldly. Wait. You're trying to tell me we might be dealing with the feds?" Joey had an understandable disbelief. No, I'm not saying that. Miles tried to recover the seriousness of the information. But I am saying I think this goes deep. Deeper than the human trafficking we just found. Miles stood up, collecting his keys. You got a lead or some shit? Elliot paused. No. I'm gonna tell the Caseys what's going on so far.
What do you plan to tell them? The kid was taken by the feds? We don't even know what's going on.
Joey's bluntness once again surfaced. Miles looked back at him. You know waiting is the worst part. Bad news is better than nothing at all. Normally, with it being an ongoing case, the details were to be kept out of the public, but he felt they needed to know how deep things were getting. Begrudgingly, he admitted that they were no closer to finding Preston than when they started. The news only served to lower them further, both the parents and the detective. The parents thanked him, albeit with a bitter tongue. While they still didn't know where Preston was, knowing what they had found in the search for him, maybe his disappearance served as a way to finally bring down the trafficking that was taking place. While their search wasn't over, the detective knew that it was over in the minds of many, possibly even for the boy's parents. It might have seemed quick, but out there, where the woods are thick and the animals are vicious, 4 days gone, the chances of finding him were all but promising. He asked the parents if he could see the boy's journal again, explaining that with all the things they had uncovered, maybe there was a connection in there that he didn't see before. They agreed, watching from the living room couch as the detective slipped into the boy's room. He found the notebook and began flipping through it. He knew exactly what he was looking for. In the last few pages, he noticed that the drawings went from bright and colorful to more dark. There was one specific page that stood out, one with almost nothing but black trees. That's when he noticed it, hidden within the shapes of the branches, the symbol. Miles quickly tore that page out, folded it, and stuck it in his pocket. As he walked out, he shook his head, claiming he found nothing. His intuition began kicking in, and like many detectives, his suspicions of everyone took over. He didn't know what it was about this case, but it was making him paranoid. However, years of doing this had taught him to trust that irrationality, because it often wasn't as illogical as it appeared to be. After returning to the precinct, he headed straight for evidence, looking for another notepad. James's. Pulling it out, he flipped through the pages. Towards the end, much like Preston's drawings, were trees, hidden within the branches of the trees. Once again, a symbol. Despite expecting this, it was still filling the detective with a sense of anxiety, which he only got when he knew he was on the right path. However, there was a bit of a habit Miles fell into whenever the case was ramping up. He had a tendency not to tell others what was going on, where he would go next, or what he was thinking. Joey was used to it, but in their line of work, a lack of information could end up getting someone killed. With motivation running high and procedure taking a back seat, Miles slipped out of the precinct, trying to remain unnoticed. After getting in his unmarked car, he headed for James's house, specifically to get to the spot in the woods from his notepad. After parking a ways down from the house, Miles stepped out of the car and began for the edge of the woods. It was becoming overcast as he entered the forest, the shadows from the trees fading as everything went gray. It took him a few minutes to get to the spot. The wind was gone, and the wildlife seemed to be upholding the silence. Nothing had changed at the spot since the detective was last there, though with the new information, he could possibly notice more things. Miles surveyed the area, doing a much more thorough check than the time before. However, he couldn't find anything, not even like the first time with the shirt. Just as his frustration peaked, the sharp sound of a stick breaking rippled through the silence. Miles shot his attention to where he heard it. Standing at the source of the noise was a person, a child, a girl. In that strange moment, he knew something was terribly wrong. Miles called out to the child, prompting them to run from him. He pursued her. Even with the detective being taller and able to cover ground faster, he couldn't seem to catch up to the girl. He called out to her again, explaining that he was a cop. Despite his reassurance that he wasn't going to hurt her, she continued to run and evade him. They ran for minutes on end, dodging trees, leaping over boulders. The woods were becoming thick, the branches scraping and holding the detective back. The girl quickly dashed behind a large tree and seemed to vanish. Miles jerked his head every direction looking for her, but she was gone, completely. On the trunk of the tree, which his right hand was placed, a symbol was carved. He quickly pulled his hand away, and as he looked around, he came to a heart-racing conclusion. The symbol was everywhere. Every tree was riddled with them. The rocks and boulders had them etched in. Even the fallen leaves were violated by them. Miles pulled out his pistol, chambering around, then putting his back against the large tree. He was sure that an ambush was guaranteed, with the trees surrounding him, their leafless branches becoming wicked hands attempting to grab him. He prepared for the worst. Once his heart rate slowed down enough to allow him to hear his surroundings, there was nothing. No sounds of an impending battalion, no shouting, not a sound, nor were there any visual signs. Once his gaze returned forward, he saw him. Preston. The boy simply stood there, 30 feet from the detective. Not a scratch, nor a speck of dirt on him. Preston looked like he had never left home. Miles called out to him weakly. His voice was hesitant, like he couldn't fully believe what he was seeing. The detective stepped towards the boy, but as he did, his vision started to become difficult, blurred, unfocused, unable to hold a direction. The closer he got, the more the effect took hold. Miles lost his balance, stumbling and falling to the ground, his sight now coming and going in flashes. Miles reached out to the boy, who was now standing beside someone that he couldn't see, no matter how hard he tried to focus. All he could see was Preston. The branches of the trees began to morph and swell around the boy. Preston seemed to wrap his right hand around one of the convening tree limbs, like he was holding hands with it. For a moment, Miles regained his vision, just quickly enough to look to the left of the boy. With only a blink, he saw a glimpse of Preston's captor. His vision went dark as he saw the boy walking off into the woods, the trees slowly obscuring him, the branches guiding him. Miles woke to a cream-white ceiling and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. He looked around, spotting Joey in a chair next to him, looking at his phone to keep him busy. Joey glanced at him, then realized his eyes were finally open.
Shit, man. What the fuck did you do?
I saw him, Miles whispered, still groggy. I saw Preston. Joey looked at him, confused. Out there, in the woods, a ways from James's house.
Sure as shit was a ways out there. Someone called the station, said they found you by the edge of Baker's Road.
Joey said, bewildered.
When we got out there, marks on the ground showed you dragged yourself a mile through the woods. Fingers were caked in dirt, nails bleeding. You saw Preston, but we didn't. Granted, we weren't looking for him, but there was no sign of anyone else.
There was a girl, too. I chased her before she vanished. I saw the symbol. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All over the trees, the rocks, everything. Joey rubbed his eyes, taking in what he was hearing. They tested your blood for drugs. Of course, it came back negative. That was the only thing that saved your ass from internal affairs. They're writing this off as stress from the case. They were both silent for a moment. Then Miles spoke, finally bringing their worst option to the forefront. We're never gonna find the boy. Joey nodded, begrudgingly. He stood, gathering his things. I'll finish the report for you. He stood up, heading for the door. But before he left the room, he said one last thing. I know that look. There's more you aren't telling me. But I also know that whatever it is, you'd probably get kicked out for thinking you're crazy. If you don't say anything about the kid, I won't either. Joey left the room, leaving Miles to contemplate what had happened. Detective Elliot Miles, personal log, final entry. It's been 2 weeks since I left the hospital. I went to a superficial burial today. This isn't the first time I've attended a funeral without a body to mourn over. That empty casket I stared at. I didn't just fill them with the thoughts of my failure and shortcomings. Those ideas were accompanied by something else. Something sinister. The knowledge that I didn't fail, but chose to pretend I did. Any truth that I could have told the friends and family would have had me removed from the force. thinking I was incompetent or intentionally covering up Preston's death. Suspicions that I was in on the disappearance would have begun. Maybe I didn't lie though, because as far as the world should be concerned, that boy is dead. We're never going to see him again. Occasionally, the truth isn't good enough. What Mrs. Elnor said. Sometimes people just vanish out here. It keeps playing in my head. I think she might be right. Sometimes people just vanish. That's what my precinct knows. That's what I wrote down on my official report. But what I have to live with is the reality. People run away. People get lost. They get stolen. But now that I know there's something else out there, I have to wonder, how many cases of people disappearing without a trace could I solve now? Even on the national level. Maybe even further. It wanted me to know it's out there, to show me how useless our system is against it, that it can do whatever it wants, and there isn't a damn thing we can say otherwise.